The morning light cut through the blinds like a blade, thin and unforgiving. I was sitting alone on the edge of my apartment couch, still in my dress blues, the jacket folded beside me like something that no longer belonged to my body. The fabric smelled faintly of starch and metal, polish, sweat, and the kind of quiet pressure that never really leaves your chest. The room was silent, except for the low hum of traffic outside and the slow ticking of a wall clock I hadn't bothered to fix since it started losing time. My phone rested in my palm, heavier than it should have been. An hour earlier, I'd stood at attention under bright lights, my name called out clean and sharp. Now, the metal sat on the coffee table, catching the light like it was trying too hard to be seen. It felt cold when I touched it. Not like pride, more like evidence. My name is Daniel Carter. I was 27 years old that morning. I remember thinking how strange it was that after everything, months of training, sleepless nights, the constant grind of discipline and silence, this was the moment my hands started shaking. Not during inspections, not during evaluations, but here, alone, after. The phone buzzed. One notification, then another. I ignored them at first, staring instead at a faint crease in my sleeve, replaying the way the applause had echoed in that hall. Clean, controlled, official. Cameras flashing, smiles timed just right. I'd done everything I was supposed to do. When I finally looked down, it wasn't a congratulatory message that caught my attention. It was an email. No subject line, just a forwarded attachment and a single sentence. Thought you should see this. The sender's name stopped me cold. Mark Carter, my older cousin. I hadn't heard from Mark in months, not since he'd casually mentioned during a rushed phone call that my father had been handling some paperwork while I was busy with training. At the time, I hadn't pushed. I never did. You learn in the military to trust systems, to assume things will be where you left them. I opened the attachment. PDF, legal formatting, clean margins. Too clean. My eyes moved slowly, methodically, the way they'd trained me to read mission briefings. Names, dates, signatures. My father's name was there. So was Linda Carter, my stepmother. Then my sister and my younger brother. Asset transfers, property adjustments, authorizations. My name appeared only once, under a section titled Affected Party. I felt the air leave my lungs, not all at once, but in pieces, like something important was being dismantled quietly, part by part, while I watched and did nothing. My knee started bouncing without me telling it to, a habit I'd picked up during inspections when you weren't allowed to move at all. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. I didn't recognize the area code. I answered anyway. "Daniel?" a woman asked. Her voice was polite, careful, professional. "Yes." "This is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a family acquaintance. Linda asked me to reach out. There may be some confusion about recent decisions, and we wanted to make sure you felt informed." Informed? I looked at the metal on the table again, at the uniform draped over my chair, at the reflection of myself in the dark TV screen, still straight-backed, still composed, still wearing the face I'd learned to wear when things were falling apart internally. "Decisions?" I asked. There was a pause, just long enough to matter. "Yes," she said, "regarding the estate." That was the moment I understood something had shifted, quietly, permanently, that whatever had been taken wasn't just property or money. It was time, trust, the assumption that the people clapping for you were on your side. And I was still in uniform when I learned it. The apartment felt colder than it should have, even with the heater humming in the corner. I stared at the metal on the table, tracing the engraved letters with a fingertip I didn't trust. Army Commendation Medal. Daniel Carter. It should have meant pride, honor, a tangible acknowledgement that the months spent crawling through mud, lugging gear, and standing in the freezing dawn were worth it. Instead, it felt like an accusation. I'm a sergeant in the United States Army, MOS 11B Infantry.
For years, I carried weapons I wasn't supposed to love and responsibilities I couldn't share. Missions in Fort Bragg, night exercises that blurred into early mornings, and the smell of gun oil that lingered in my hands long after showers became mandatory. It was all routine, precision, control, discipline. And in the military, your word is a bond, your actions measurable. You know your value before anyone else does. Family, though. Family is different. They see you as permanent, predictable, and replaceable. And mine had been quietly reshaping my world while I followed orders, one bullet, one step, one long night at a time. I leaned back and closed my eyes, letting the memory come unbidden. It was 3 years ago, just before my deployment to Afghanistan. I had stopped by the house to drop off some last-minute paperwork for my parents. I'd only gotten home for a week, enough to breathe in the smell of old carpet and reheated lasagna. My father, Robert Carter, was hunched over his laptop in the living room, the sunlight slicing across the keyboard. He barely looked up. "Everything set for your deployment?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, without turning. "Just make sure you don't get yourself killed, huh?" He smirked, a half smile that never reached his eyes. Typical. I glanced around. Linda, my stepmother, was arranging boxes in the kitchen. She waved vaguely. My younger brother, Ethan, was playing on the floor with his tablet. My sister, Rachel, scrolled through her phone, completely uninterested. The room smelled faintly of cinnamon and cleaning spray. I remember noticing the faint tension, the way my father's hand shook slightly over the keyboard, but I shrugged it off, thinking I was overanalyzing. I always did. My military mind assumed people would act logically. Families don't. Fast forward to the present. Sitting here, still in dress blues, staring at the metal, it hit me how wrong I'd been. My father, my stepmother, my siblings, they didn't act logically, they acted opportunistically. And now the quiet decision they made was staring back at me from a PDF file. I thought about the long nights in the barracks, the ways we trained to see threats before they saw us, the way I studied maps, memorized patterns, anticipated ambushes. I could spot an enemy a mile off in the dark, yet I never noticed the quiet moves in my own family's living room, not even close. The email from Mark was still on my screen. "Thought you should see this." I scrolled again, the words burning into my memory. Property sold, bank accounts adjusted, legal signatures finalized. And no one had called me, not a single text, not a single voicemail that didn't come from a third party. My father had smiled at me at every family dinner for years. My stepmother had asked about my training. Rachel had laughed at my jokes. And all the while, decisions were being made. Deals were finalized. My life quietly altered. I pressed my palms to my face and inhaled, steadying myself. My training kicked in, the calm eye of the storm. This was my family. They were human, flawed, predictable in ways I had never wanted, and now predictable in the worst way. But reacting emotionally wouldn't help. Not yet. I had a ceremony coming up, an official moment, a record, proof that my life, at least the part I controlled, had integrity. The decision wasn't violent or dramatic, it was quiet, deliberate. I opened a new email and typed a short message. "Received your email. Noted." No anger, no pleading, no demand for explanation, just acknowledgement. Control where I could have it. I let my mind wander to the life I had chosen. Army life, discipline, missions that mattered. Nights when the wind whipped over the training grounds and I was the only one awake, scanning the horizon, counting the seconds, feeling my heart pound against my chest. I had learned to trust systems, trust chains of command, trust that what I could control, I would control. What I couldn't, I had to observe. And now, my family had become part of that operational landscape. My observation post wasn't a hilltop or a guard tower. It was my apartment, a glowing screen, and a growing understanding that some threats come from home. I poured myself a cup of coffee, black, letting it sit in my hands until it got cold. The bitter taste grounded me. I remembered my drill sergeant yelling at us in basic. Discipline isn't just what you do in front of others. Discipline is what you do when nobody's watching. That was the lesson now. Quiet, internal, unseen. I thought about the phone call from Sarah Mitchell again. Confusion about recent decisions, she had said, a polite, manufactured calm. I could almost hear Linda instructing her, "Don't give him more than he needs." A silent war waged in papers and signatures, and I had been blissfully unaware while following orders elsewhere. For the first time in hours, I stood up and began preparing. My uniform was pressed and folded on the chair. I pulled the jacket on, the cold metal of the metal pinned over my chest where my heart was. I adjusted the collar, straightened the crease in my trousers. My reflection in the mirror showed a man trained to endure, to present control, to maintain dignity. I grabbed my keys. The world outside awaited. The ceremony, my official acknowledgement, the one thing no one could quietly take from me, the one moment where my service, my choices, my integrity would be visible, public, recorded, real. Even if my family had decided to manipulate, move, and sell in secret, even if trust had been quietly fractured, I had control here, in this moment, at this stage, standing tall, shoulders back, chest forward, proof that I had lived up to every standard, in every mission, in every quiet, lonely moment that had built me. And yet, a small part of me, the part that trusted family, wanted to pick up the phone and call Linda, to demand answers, to ask my father why, to hear Rachel's voice, to make sure Ethan didn't feel guilty for something he didn't understand. But discipline kicked in again. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't react. Not yet. Observation first, integrity second, and at last, the final act, the ceremony. I slid into my car, the engine humming to life, the air conditioner faintly buzzing. Outside, the world was moving as usual. Birds darted between trees, mail trucks rumbled by, neighbors whispered greetings I barely noticed. Inside, the weight of what had already happened pressed on me quietly, methodically, like a map I had to memorize before I could navigate it. The metal on my chest felt heavier than it should have, but I didn't touch it. I drove. Traffic was light. My mind wasn't racing. It was calculating, processing, cataloging. The ceremony awaited. A public record, a beacon. My family might have already decided, already acted, but the record would be mine. And in the Army, records matter more than words, more than apologies, more than denial.
The auditorium smelled of polish and old carpet. Rows of folding chairs faced the stage like soldiers ready for inspection. My boots clicked sharply against the floor as I walked, each step measured, precise, the way I had been trained. Behind me, parents, family friends, and distant cousins murmured, a low current of polite chatter. Somewhere in the crowd, my father, Robert Carter, sat with his arms crossed. Linda, my stepmother, smiled tightly, eyes scanning the audience like she was calculating angles. Rachel fiddled with her phone. Ethan fidgeted in his seat. I stood at attention, hands pressed neatly against my thighs, metal glinting under the stage lights. The announcer's voice was crisp, professional. My name echoed through the speakers. Sergeant Daniel Carter. Applause. Hands clapping, cameras flashing. Faces in the crowd smiled. But not the right faces, not the faces that mattered. I caught my father's eyes for a brief moment. He nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, but there was no warmth, no pride, just formality. The ceremony continued. Names rolled by, medals pinned, cameras clicked. I moved through it with the same precision I had been trained in countless drills. Measured steps, controlled expression, no hesitation. My uniform sat perfectly, my chest forward, my posture immaculate. Proof, undeniable, of discipline and honor. Afterward, the small reception allowed families and guests to approach the newly decorated soldiers. Handshakes, smiles, photos. And then, them. "Congrats," my father said, voice flat, barely above neutral. "Thanks," I replied. Linda offered a brief, tight-lipped smile. "Well, we're proud of you," she added,
the emphasis betraying her rehearsed tone. Rachel looked up from her phone. "Cool. Congrats, I guess." Ethan's gaze was hesitant. A child doesn't understand betrayal, not fully, but I saw a flicker of guilt, a tiny awareness. No one mentioned the documents. No one acknowledged the quiet upheaval that had already rearranged my life. My chest tightened. I wanted to ask, to demand, to explode, but the calm ire of the storm took over. I reminded myself, discipline, observation, integrity. Later, as guests trickled out, I found a quiet corner by the stage exit. I pressed my palms together, took a slow breath, and let it out in a long hiss, hands still shaking slightly, not from anger, not from fear, from disappointment, the deep settling ache of betrayal. I realized something fundamental. The validation I sought from them would never come, not here, not now, and maybe never. Their applause, smiles, and photographs could not rewrite the quiet reality. They had acted. I had observed. Now it was time to shift my focus from what they had taken to what I had earned. The public record existed. The medal, the ceremony footage, every frame, every document, every official mention was mine. It couldn't be stolen. I walked through the crowd, offered polite nods, and let conversations happen around me without participation. Small talk bounced off my ears. Someone asked about my next assignment. I smiled faintly. "Fort Bragg," I said. Truthful, simple. The weight of expectation lifted slightly. Back at my apartment that evening, I set the medal carefully on the shelf, aligned perfectly with my boots and uniform. I stared at it. Proof, real and immutable, of the work I had done. And for the first time that day, I allowed myself a private, quiet pride. Then came the notifications. Texts from extended family, questions from friends of friends, curiosity about my uniform, the ceremony, the award, and in the corner of my screen, the subtle pings from my own family. A message from Rachel. "Why didn't you tell me about the medal?" From Linda. "You should have called. This is all confusing." From my father. "I guess congratulations are in order." Each message hit differently, not like anger, not like shock, but like water against stone. Slow erosion of expectations I no longer held. I didn't reply. I didn't argue. Observation, reflection, integrity. Because at that moment, I realized the collision had already happened, not in words, but in the quiet evidence of my life. The betrayal, the dismissal, the silent gaping chasm, it existed. And I had responded not with explosive confrontation, but with measured presence. Hours later, sitting in the glow of my desk lamp, I finally allowed myself to think about the future. Not about revenge, not about forcing acknowledgement, but about focus, discipline, and self-respect. My life was still mine. My achievements were still real. The record was unaltered, and that was enough. I reached for my camera, the one I kept for documentation, and pressed record. "If you're watching this," I said softly, eyes meeting the lens, "and if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or betrayed while doing the right thing, I want you to know something. You don't need their validation. The proof of your life, your choices, your honor, it's yours. Protect that. Hold on to that. That's enough." I paused, looked down at the medal on my desk, and back at the camera. And if you want more stories like this, true accounts of service, sacrifice, and betrayal, hit subscribe, click the bell. You won't want to miss the next chapter, because this is just the beginning. The recording stopped. Silence returned, except for the hum of the heater, the distant traffic, and the faint echo of a world moving around me, while I stood still, finally grounded, finally at peace with the truth I carried alone. Days passed after the ceremony. The medal sat on my shelf, polished and unyielding, a silent witness to my service and perseverance. But life outside the military doesn't stop for honor. It marches forward, indifferent, chaotic, unaware. I returned to routines, physical training, paperwork, reports, and the quiet observation of those around me. The weight of betrayal lingered, constant but controlled. Then it began, small, almost imperceptible. A tag on social media, a forwarded message, a friend of a friend sharing photos of the ceremony, the official press release, names, medals, dates. My family's careful control, the invisible manipulation, the secrecy that had seemed impenetrable was now public. It started with Rachel. A message appeared in my inbox. "I don't get it. Why didn't anyone tell me? I saw the video. Dad, Linda, I don't understand." I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I watched, cataloged, analyzed. Discipline, even in civilian matters, still mattered. Hours later, my father called. His voice was tight, guarded. "Daniel, we saw the footage. Looks like congratulations are in order, really." There was no warmth, no pride, but there was hesitation, a crack in the armor of pretense. Linda texted shortly after. "We didn't realize. Everything looked different online. Can we talk?" The absurdity hit me. They had already acted, sold assets, transferred property, moved money, quietly, invisibly, like a military operation in reverse. And now, faced with the undeniable proof of my existence, my integrity, they reached out as if realization could erase years of betrayal. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I reflected. Years of training had prepared me for ambushes, for deception, for unseen threats. The enemy was never my family, not in the traditional sense, but the strategies were the same. Patience, observation, maintaining composure, and never revealing weakness. I thought of Ethan. My little brother had no part in this, not fully, but guilt weighed on him. He reached out, text after text, hesitant, trying to find his place in a world rearranged without him. I replied once, simply, "It's okay, learn from this." And that was enough. My father's emails followed, Linda's polite attempts at explanation, Rachel's confused apologies. None of it mattered, not in the way I thought it would when I first opened that PDF. Validation from them was irrelevant. What mattered was the record, the medal, the ceremony, my discipline, my integrity. The proof existed, public, undeniable, permanent. I realized something crucial. The shift wasn't in them, it was in me. I had spent weeks, months even, waiting for acknowledgement, for apology, for recognition. I had imagined confrontation, rage, words that would hurt, truths that would cut deep. But standing here, observing their belated awareness, I understood something deeper. The transformation had already happened, inside me. I didn't need their apologies. I didn't need their recognition. I didn't need their validation. What I needed was control over my life, my actions, and my integrity, and that was mine, unassailable. Weeks turned into months. Social media posts, family gatherings, casual mentions all revealed their awkward attempts to reconcile with a truth they had ignored for too long. I observed quietly, nodded politely, engaged when necessary. But I did not wait for change. I had already shifted. One evening, I walked through the apartment, medal in hand. I set it next to my rifle, my boots, my uniform. The room was quiet, still, ordered, controlled, like me. I let my gaze drift to the window, to the city below, alive and indifferent. The world moved on, but I had made my peace. I pulled out my camera, just as I had before, and pressed record. If you've ever been betrayed, ignored, or dismissed by those closest to you, know this: your truth, your honor, and your integrity exist independent of their recognition. You don't need permission to be proud. You don't need validation to know your worth. Protect that, hold on to that, and the rest is just noise. I paused, looking at the lens. My hand rested on the metal, cold and unyielding. And if you want to see more stories like this, real stories of sacrifice, betrayal, and service, subscribe to the channel. Click the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. These stories aren't just mine, they belong to anyone who's ever stood tall while the world tried to move pieces behind their back. I stopped the recording. Silence returned, but it was different now. Quiet, hard-won, complete. The next day, I checked the comments on the last upload. Messages poured in. I thought I was alone in this, thank you. Your story resonates with me, my family did the same. I never knew how to respond, but this helps. I smiled faintly, not because my family had realized their mistakes, but because someone, somewhere, finally understood. Not them, not the world, they understood, and that understanding was real, tangible, and shared. The medal remained on the shelf, the uniform still hung perfectly, and I had my peace. Discipline, integrity, honor, quiet, unshakable, mine alone.